Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Hey, John. See some familiar faces. Hey, Jerome. Hey, Sarah. Well, welcome. My name is Alex LaPierre. I'm the program director for nonprofit Border Community Alliance that is based in Tubac, Arizona. And our mission is really bridging the border and fostering community through education, collaboration, and cultural exchange. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited about the topic that we're going to cover today. Very appropriate. I hope everyone is wearing green today. Did you guys come from a school where kids would pinch you if you didn't wear green? I don't think that this level, I'm not sure if this level of Zoom has the capability of doing the virtual pinch quite yet. So I think you can raise your hand virtually, but you can't do the St. Patrick's Day pinch as they call it. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to open it up for a Q&A. So I hope you guys will have some questions as well for me. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of shift over to the presentation. There's some people joining us here still. I'm going to let them in right before I shift over because I don't think I can see them. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. So I'm going to shift over now to the presentation. I'll share my screen. Please let me know too if you have any trouble seeing any of the pictures. I know sometimes there's some issue with Zoom where the pictures won't show up. I do have a PDF backup just in case, but can everyone see my screen and the images successfully? More or less? Just let me know. Feel free to kind of chime in and let me know.
Yes, we can.
Yes, you can. Awesome. So today's presentation is on Los San Patricios, the St. Patrick's Battalion in the Mexican-American War. Kind of a forgotten war, given the fact that right after pretty much happened the U.S. Civil War. So I wanted to kind of start off, since this is a forum and I just don't want to be the only one talking. I'm really interested to learn, what do you know or have you heard about the St. Patrick's Battalion? So I'm going to go back into stopping the share and maybe kind of see if anybody has anything to add. Feel free to unmute yourself, or if you know anything about the battalion, feel free to add it into the chat function as well.
I never heard of it.
Sarah's never heard of it?
Alex, I think a number of years ago, I heard about it from you and I've been so curious ever since. I even picked up this book on the subject.
That's the go-to. That's the one right there. You've got the Bible, the San Patricios.
Yeah, and I've been to Chapultepec Castle as well. So yeah.
Perfect. Anyone else know anything? Have heard anything about the San Patricio Battalion?
It piqued my interest at Tumacorkery a couple of weeks ago.
Oh yeah, definitely. Ismail Sanchez says Irish soldiers from the U.S. Army that switched sides and joined the Mexican Army. Correct, absolutely correct. Anyone else would like to share anything about what they may have heard about this unique kind of segment of history shared between the U.S. and Mexico? Nope. Alrighty, I'll go back, go ahead and share my screen again and go back into the presentation. Awesome. So the presentation overview is going to look like this. We're going to first kind of highlight the tradition of Irish foreign service in the military, many different nations. We're going to talk about a local Irish connection here in our history here in Southern Arizona. And number three, we're going to look a little bit at the background of this unique case. We'll first look at the Irish potato famine, of course, and following that, we'll look at the Mexican-American War and some of its causes. Then we'll kind of pivot over to a little bit of a FAQ, who, where, what, why, and then we'll look most importantly at the motivations for the desertion. And then we'll kind of switch over to a short biography on John Riley, who is the leader. We'll talk about the flag, the famous flag of the St. Patricios. We'll highlight some of the battles that they fought, some of the real consequential battles of the war. We'll discuss their fate. and then we'll look at the San Patricios in the media, and then finally talk about their commemoration today. And this image was really kind of the where they were captured at the Battle of Churubusco, just on the outskirts of Mexico City. They made their last stand at a fortified convent. They were actually at a bridgehead where they had artillery, and that's where they ended up being captured on August 20th, 1847. So kind of giving you a little bit of insight about the military tradition of Irish service and Hispanic forces. In 1598, Diego Brochero de Anaya wrote the Spanish king lamenting the lack of sailors in the Spanish Armada. He suggested as a remedy that every year your highness should order to recruit in Ireland some Irish soldiers who are people tough and strong, and nor the cold weather or bad food could kill them easily, as they would with the Spanish. As in their island, which is much colder than this one, they are almost naked. They sleep on the floor and eat oats bread, meat, and water without drinking any wine. So they're a pretty hard scrapful people, according to this Spanish observer back in the 16th century. And to acknowledge a little bit of local Irish history, one of my favorite cities in Arizona, Tucson, was actually founded in 1775, 1776 by OConnor, who was one of Ireland's wild geese, as they were known. They were Irishmen, Irish Catholics, oftentimes kind of lower nobility that were averse to the English colonial rule over their island. And so they fled and offered their services, their military services, to the Spanish crown, a Catholic crown, if you will. And there's a statue right there of O'Connor that's in the Manning House, pretty close to the Presidio, the Presidio San Agustin, just off of Main Street, which is the former El Camino Real. And there you have this beautiful drawing or painting of the Presidio, which he founded back in that date of 20th of August, 1775. And this is actually the original document that he signed, saying, "I, Hugo O'Connor, Knight of the Order of Calatrava, Colonel of Infantry in His Majesty's armies, and Commandant Inspector of the Frontier Post of New Spain, certify that I selected and marked out a place known as San Agustin del Tucson as the new site of the Presidio. It is situated at a distance from 18 leagues from Tubac, fulfills the requirement of water, pasture, and wood," very important back then, "and effectively closes the Apache frontier." So we're kind of going to look at the background. So how did the Irish end up here? And most of us have all heard of the famous potato famine. It was a period of mass starvation and disease in Ireland between 1845 and 1852. The root causes was a potato monoculture, an English colonial absentee landlordism. And it's estimated that between 1845 and 1855, approximately 2 million people left Ireland, one of the greatest mass exoduses in history. And it's estimated that around 0.25% loss of the entire population was due to the deaths and immigration of the Irish. When they arrived in the United States, they faced anti-Catholic, racial, nativist reactions to the arrival on the Eastern Seaboard. There were anti-immigrant riots in the northeastern cities. Some of you may recall the film Gangs of New York with Martin Scorsese. There's that famous opening scene where the nativists are battling the Irish immigrants, the dead rabbits. It's kind of a great dramatization of the conflict between these two groups. By the 1840s, Catholic immigrants from Ireland and Germany make up a significant portion of the U.S. Army's enlisted soldiers. So in this, we can kind of see that history doesn't really change. Today we have many immigrants that are also in our enlisted service as well. They almost got off the boat in New York Harbor, and then down there at the dock was the military recruiters, and they got back up on the boat and headed for Mexico. And I really enjoy this image here of the statues here of Ireland, depicting the famine-stricken folks. So I'm just gonna check really quick. It looks like we have one person here in waiting, kind of multitasking here. So I'm gonna add that person real quick, and then I'm gonna go back to my presentation. Alrighty. So yeah, it's a really kind of dramatic statue and monument there in Ireland. So we'll talk a little bit about the background of the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. According to the Center for Greater Southwestern Studies at the University of Texas in Arlington, it was the largest and most significant armed struggle in the Western Hemisphere between two nations. Really, its origins have to do with the manifest destiny ideology that was exposed during the time, particularly of the American president, James Polk, who ran on the platform that he was only gonna run for one term. And he really advocated for this annexation of both Texas and Oregon. Really, if you kind of peel away the layers, the motivation of the war can be seen as a land acquisition to expand slavery. That, there's kind of this dispute between the northern states and the southern states. There was this kind of back and forth about new states joining and whether they would be slave or not. It was really instigated over a dispute between the boundary, the international boundary. Of course, Texas became its own republic. Then it was annexed by the United States. And there was some discord between whether the southern boundary was on the Rio Nueces or the Rio Grande. And so what Polk did cleverly was send American troops down there and in between that kind of strip of land between the two rivers, and was kind of testing the waters to instigate the Mexicans to attack them and have a reason for the beginning of the Mexican-American War. And it's estimated that over 5,000 American soldiers deserted during the conflict. It wasn't a popular war. U.S. Grant was a young lieutenant in the Mexico-U.S. War of 1846 and 1848. And here you can see his opinion. For myself, Grant wrote later about the United States war against Mexico. I was bitterly opposed to the measure, and to this day, regard the war which resulted as one of the most unjust ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. Not only U.S. Grant, but a young congressman from Illinois by the name of Abraham Lincoln also was very much against the war. And his famous case in Congress against the war was known as the Spot Resolutions, where he tried to have Polk identify the spot where American blood was spilled and whether that could be truthfully discerned as American soil or Mexican soil. We're going to do a little bit of a FAQ here. So who were the San Patricios? They were recent immigrant soldiers who were largely of the Catholic faith, fighting for the United States, who later defected to fight for Mexico during the Mexican-American War. Where were they from? They were primarily from Ireland, but the foreign military unit also encompassed soldiers from other European countries, including England, Scotland, Poland, and Germany. It's believed up to a dozen different nationalities comprise their ranks. How and when did the battalion start? John Riley assembled an artillery unit in April 1846, comprised of Irishmen, the core of the San Patricios. By the summer, there were 200 soldiers in the battalion, organized into two companies. In November 1846, General Santana organized American deserters with other foreigners in Mexico to form the San Patricio Battalion. And this was a commemorative stamp that was done jointly between Mexico and Ireland to celebrate an anniversary. So this is probably one of the most important slides. One of the most people question, what was their motivations behind their defection, their desertion over to the Mexican side? Desertion has happened. Desertion has happened in almost every American conflict. But what's so unique about this case is that not only did they deserted, but they assembled and organized a foreign corps to fight against what was once their comrades, the U.S. military. I really enjoy going back into the primary sources, documents from the era, and this is just one case of that. This is George Ballantine. He was an English soldier in the service of the American military during the Mexican-American War, and I'll mention his quote here. As the majority of these deserters were Irish, the cause commonly assigned by the officers for the desertion was that they were Roman Catholics. They imagined they were fighting against their religion in fighting the Mexicans. I have good reason to believe, in fact, some individual cases I know, that harsh and unjust treatment by their officers operated far more strongly than any other consideration to produce the deplorable result. The various degrading modes of punishment often inflicted by young, headstrong, and inconsiderate officers in their zeal for the discipline of the service for the most trivial offenses were exceedingly galling to the fiery, untamable spirit of the sons of the Green Isle. And I have not the slightest doubt that those barbarous modes of punishment in common adoption and the want of sympathy generally existing between the officers and their men were the exciting causes of the majority of these cases of desertion, so lamentably frequent. So 5,000. The leader, John Riley, he was a commander of the St. Patrick's Battalion. According to U.S. Army enlistment records from September 1845, he was born in Clifton County, Galway, Ireland, around 1817 to 1818. And you can see there on that Google map where exactly Clifton is. He was a British Army veteran, and he served in Canada with the 66th Regiment of the Foot. He deserted to the U.S., and that's where he served as a drill sergeant at West Point. He later deserted from Company K, 5th U.S. Infantry, on the eve of the declaration of war between the U.S. and Mexico. You'll recall that I mentioned that Polk sent the forces down there to the Rio Nueces in Rio Grande strip of land, and they were down there at the eve of the war. And basically what happened was Riley leveraged the pretext of going to mass to cross the Rio Grande and desert to the Mexican side. He was later promoted to a Mexican major, as a Mexican major. And this is the flag of the St. Patrick's Battalion. There are two other eyewitness accounts of the flags that exist, both from American soldiers. The first describes it as a beautiful green silk banner which waved over their heads. On it glittered a silver cross and a golden harp, embroidered by the hands of the fair nuns of San Luis Potosi. That was according to Samuel E. Chamberlain in his book, My Confession. The second notes only, among the mighty host we passed was O'Reilly and his company of deserters, bearing aloft in high disgrace the holy banner of St. Patrick. And that comes from a Kentucky cavalryman that was captured by the Mexican military. And what's interesting is that the only version of the flag known to have survived the war was later either lost or stolen from the chapel at West Point. And to kind of further add intrigue to this pot, there was actually a pretty well-known cover-up about the St. Patrick's Battalion in the US. There was actually a congressional investigation, I believe, in the 19-teens that really kind of laid bare this case for the public. The St. Patrick's Battalion really fought in almost every major battle of the US Mexican-American War. And here was the Battle of Monterey. So you have Zachary Taylor's forces that are coming from Texas, crossing the Rio Grande, and the first big urban settlement that they encounter is Monterey. So they took it, and it was, of course, an American victory and one of the first big battles of the war in 1846. And here's this great image that you have, a lithograph. The next battle was the Battle of Buena Vista. It would happen between the 22nd and 23rd of February in 1847. And here, the St. Patrick's Battalion really distinguished itself. They served as artillerymen at a heavy gun battery. In Mexico, this battle is known as the Battle of Angostura, or a narrow place. And it's located near the city of Saltillo in Coahuila State, just adjacent to Chihuahua State. And then finally, the climax, the defeat of the San Patricio Battalion at the Battle of Churubusco. That took place in the 20th of August, 1847, where the San Patricio Battalion made their last stand. And as I mentioned, they positioned themselves at a fortified bridgehead. They were kind of the vanguard, and they were overwhelmed. And after the battle, the U.S. Army was only 5 miles away of Mexico City. And what's interesting is that fortified convent where they were stationed at today is where Mexico City is one of its great museums. The National Museum of Interventions is located today, just adjacent to the Coyoacan neighborhood, a really nice neighborhood. It's kind of interesting that Mexico has a whole museum devoted to interventions, because this wasn't the first. After Spain lost the Independence War, Spain also came back and invaded in the 1830s. There was a famous the pastry war, known as the Pastry War, when the French invaded also later in the 1830s. And then the French come back in the 1860s. And of course, this famous intervention, which took place in the 1840s with the US military. What many people don't realize, this was really the largest mass execution in U.S. history after they were captured at that final battle. There was the second biggest mass execution in U.S. history was actually during the Dakota War, when Abraham Lincoln, I think it was around 38 indigenous captured troops were also hung. But these hangings took place between the 10th and 13th of September in 1847. 50 of the members were actually captured and court-martialed for desertion and executed. The executions took place in the San Jacinto and Chapultepec districts of Mexico City. And this is a really great drawing image. It shows the hanging. And what's so kind of heartbreaking about the execution is that the U.S. military basically executed them on a hill, and that hill was facing the Castillo de Chapultepec, which was kind of the last final stand in Mexico City, where the famous Niños Héroes, or the Mexican military cadets, who are honored to this day as well in Mexico, kind of made their last stand. And the U.S. military decided to hang them at the very moment that the Mexican flag was brought down and the American flag was brought up. And then the order was given to hang all of the 50 men. And what did you have? You basically had the U.S. military occupation of Mexico City and the Mexican surrender, which ended the war. And here's another lithograph that shows the Zócalo smack dab in downtown Mexico City. You have the cathedral. And then in the background there, you have the National Palace, which was in the news recently for the Women's Day March, but you can see the American flag flying high over the National Palace, which was the former palace of the viceroys when it was part of New Spain. Los San Patricios in the media. Jerome West, who's joining us, a good friend, he reminded me about this CD called Los San Patricio by the famous Irish band, the Chieftains, and it's featuring Ry Cooder. It's a great album. It has many collaborations with international artists, including Linda Ronstadt, very well locally known, Lila Downs, even Galician bagpiper Carlos Nunez. And it's really an innovative and fascinating foray into telling the story of San Patricios by way of music. And it also has made its way into film. And One Man's Hero in 1999 came out with Tom Berenger. And it's basically telling that story. If you guys if this piques your interest, the entire film is actually available on YouTube. And then we're gonna kind of wrap up here with a commemoration of the San Patricios today in Mexico. Los San Patricios continue to be honored for their bravery during some of the war's most significant battles to this day by the Mexican people. Actually, when the Mexican people found out that they were gonna hang the Irishmen that way, there was a lot of people that wanted to come after the American military prisoners. Luckily, the Mexican forces stopped them, but they wanted revenge for this really kind of awful way that they executed the San Patricio Battalion. And every year on September 12th, which is when the anniversary when they were executed, there's a ceremony organized at the Plaza San Jacinto in the south of Mexico City in the San Angel district, where many of the San Patricios were executed. And this is the plaque that's you can see to this day. It's displayed on the wall, and it was erected in 1959 in gratitude by the Mexican state. And the translation of the text is as follows: in memory of the Irish soldiers of the heroic St. Patrick's Battalion, martyrs who gave their life for the cause of Mexico during the unjust American invasion of 1847. And there is the names of the 71 men captured, killed, or executed by the Americans in 1847. But only 50 of the St. Patrick's Battalion members were officially executed by the U.S. Army. Mexican President Vicente Fox, many of us remember him, the famous PAN party president in the early 2000s. In 2003, he proclaimed the affinities between Ireland and Mexico go back to the first years of our nation, when our country fought to preserve its national sovereignty. Then a brave group of Irish soldiers, in a heroic gesture, decided to fight against the foreign ground invasion. And so there's, I just mentioned that there were 71 captured, but 50 were executed. And one of the members of the San Patricio Battalion that wasn't executed was actually their commander. And he was not executed because his desertion actually predated the declaration of war. Remember, he was there kind of occupying that strip of land between the two rivers when he crossed over to ostensibly go to mass. What did happen as far as punishment goes is that he did receive 50 lashes and was branded twice on each cheek with a D because for deserter. And it was only supposed to be one, but the soldier in charge of the branding branded it upside down, the first D. And so the other cheek was also branded with D again. And he also served the sentence of hard labor. He later returned to the Mexican army to serve as a brevet major and served near Veracruz, the port city. He was discharged in 1850 with full honor and full pay. And there's still kind of uncertainty about his fate after discharge. There's been some death records that have been uncovered, but Riley was a pretty popular, pretty common last name. So they're not quite sure when he passed away. But here you have this image of his statue there in Mexico. And the figure on the left is Pepe Mead. He was the one that actually ran unsuccessfully against AMLO in this last election for the PRI party. And then also you have President Higgins and Joe Costello, which are Irish representatives there in Ireland, from Ireland in Mexico. And I just wanted to say thank you. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And thanks for joining this presentation today. And these are some of my works cited for this presentation as well. So if I'm happy to open up any for the Q&A forum, if anyone has any questions for me.
Would you just repeat the name of that film that we can see on YouTube?
Sure, it's One Man's Hero.
Okay, thank you.
I'll put it here in the chat.
Alex, was there an incentive for the Irish to join the American Army to begin with?
Oh, that's a great question. I neglected to say that, Sarah. Yeah, actually the Mexican forces, when they were there at the Rio Grande, kind of anticipating American aggression, they knew full well kind of the dynamic, the discord between the Irish immigrant soldiers and the nativist officers. And so they kind of distributed leaflets, kind of a, quote unquote propaganda. And they promised 320 acres of land. They promised, money for joining the Mexican forces. So that would probably be another motivation to acknowledge, in addition to the kind of the religion, the harsh treatment that we described as well, and really feeling like they had no nation. The recommended book on Los San Patricios, that's the one John has, right? John, can you remind me what the name is of that book again?
So I don't know if you can see the
Irish Soldiers of Mexico.
Yeah, it's available in English and Spanish. Take your pick.
All right, Irish Soldiers of Mexico. I'll put that in here in the chat. Any other questions?
Alex, I just made a comment on the Q&A. I don't know how many people know the Marine Corps hymn. From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Yeah. That battle at Chapultepec was the halls of Montezuma.
Yeah, exactly. The original Suicide Squad, the Mexican military cadets that they say wrapped the Mexican flag around them and kind of jumped off the patio rather than surrender to the U.S. forces. But thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. That's totally appropriate.
Montezuma, that's Mexico?
Yeah.
Oh.
Any other questions from anyone else?
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
No. Let me see if I can pull up the I'll add a link right now for the YouTube video, so you guys can if you're really interested in watching it, you can watch it on YouTube completely free. One Man's Hero. That's the link for the film.
Great.
Awesome. How's everybody celebrating St. Patrick's Day today? You got the corned beef in the crock pot?
We had that last week.
Oh, you did? You're excited.
Hmm.
It's usually,
Alex, why do you think that this bit of history is so completely unknown to most of us?
I think because it's not flattering to the U.S. Perspective. It's really not a flattering.
Because of the mistreatment of the Irish, you mean?
Yeah, the mistreat. Well, the fact that not only they deserted, like every American conflict, there's always been deserters, but this is really the only one where not only did they desert, but they organized to form a foreign corps and actually fought back against those that they had originally were with, their comrades.
Mhm.
And so that's what was that cover up in the congressional investigation. I think it was like in 1915. And that's why I also think that flag went missing from the chapel in West Point, was because they don't want people knowing about this. You know, it doesn't really paint a rosy picture of the U.S. military. How the treatment, it was very barbaric. You know, can you imagine receiving 50 lashes and getting 2 brands on each cheek to have that reminder for the rest of your life?
Right. Well, the whole Mexican-American War isn't very well documented for most of us. I mean, I don't remember learning anything about it.
Yeah, it kind of goes overlooked because, you know, 20 years later or 10, 15 was really the U.S. Civil War, where a lot of the veterans of the Mexican conflict ended up becoming oftentimes officers. That was their experience.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Including U.S. Grant, who was against the war, and Abraham Lincoln too. The spot, I'll write that in here as well if you look that up.
Alex, were there incentives for the Irish to join the Americans at the beginning of the war? I'm curious why people who had just come to the United States would want to go to war on the side of the U.S.
I think the real incentive is that they were coming from famine. So any pay or any kind of staff of life, you know, if they joined up, they were pretty bereft of anything when they arrived at New York Harbor. So joining the military, I mean, I think a lot of people imagine would lead to more acceptance too as a new immigrant. But we can see that today, to this day, it's common. A lot of the U.S. military is made up of immigrants. Ismail Sanchez asks, did the Irish soldiers have any relatives that stayed in the U.S. after they deserted in the U.S. Army? Was there any retaliation against their families by the U.S. government after the war? Not that I know, but you know, oftentimes they did immigrate as families, and the young sons would join up for the military and be able to send their wages back to their families wherever they were in the U.S. I don't recall ever reading any documentation where there was retaliation against their families by the U.S. government, but there was retaliation by the nativist factions, right? There was that political party known as the Know Nothings that were very anti-immigrant party.
Who were the Know Nothings?
They were a political party that kind of rose up in the 1840s that were nativists. They were very much against the immigrants coming on. That was their platform, basically, to run against the immigrants. There was a nativist political faction.
Okay. Alex, this isn't about the Irish specifically, but the United States battled all the way down and took over as far south as Mexico City. Why did they then take real estate only as far as the Rio Grande?
Because, you know, I think they realized that the Mexican people were so different than Anglo-American people. There are great primary documents that talk about that. That they don't think that they could have absorbed the Mexican people into the culture of the Anglo-American culture of the U.S. They had a hard time absorbing the Irish and the German Catholics that were arriving at the same time. And so their whole interest was just basically carving enough states to have slave states like Texas, and also making it to the Pacific coast was their real kind of driving force. I don't think it was taking over Mexico as well. Great question. And it was a two-prong attack. There was Zachary Taylor that came down through Texas, and then actually Winfield Scott, who was a really famous military general from the War of 1812 that led the attack from Veracruz and onward to Mexico City. And he later ran for president, and he actually lost against the other general, Zachary Taylor.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else that we may have not heard from?
I have a comment.
Sure.
I believe a few years ago, there was on the wall in the Historical Society, the Arizona History Museum here in Tucson, there was a letter saying that they didn't want to have the United States annex any part of Mexico because they wanted to protect the Southern women from non-white men. It was written, I believe, between politicians or whatever, but there it was.
Yeah, there was. I mean, today we're still feeling the effects of racism, but it's at the root of our nation is really racism. It wasn't until the 1960s, I want to say, that there was interracial marriage allowed in the U.S. And that wasn't the case for Mexico. And Mexico was also had forbidden slavery, right? That was the big issue with the Texans, right? Is that they had feigned loyalty to the Mexican government and also feigned conversion to Catholicism, but they still wanted slavery. And so I think that was one of the main motivations for fighting against the Mexican military in Texas at the Battle of San Jacinto, the Battle of the Alamo. It was that. But I don't think that they recognized the fact that their culture was not compatible with the Mexican culture for many reasons, for racial reasons, for religious reasons, for historical reasons as well, kind of all of the above.
Thank you for doing this, Alex. This is
Thank
just
Thanks,
incredibly
Alex.
interesting.
Oh,
Great.
I'm
That
so
was
glad.
great.
I'm so glad you guys liked it. Yeah, it's kind of it's a perfect excuse of today, the St. Patrick's Day, to really highlight this little known part of history and kind of realize that there's not just one way of telling history. There's many ways of telling history, and hopefully more research will in Mexican archives and archives in the United States and Ireland will lead to more kind of documentary findings about this really incredible group of soldiers. Ismail Sanchez says, we appreciate the Irish bravery in Mexico. The Mexican-American War is very well taught in Mexico. I was really surprised when I started grad school in Tucson to realize that most Americans do not know much about the major part of their history. Thanks a lot for this presentation. Yeah, I think you spoke in truth there, Ismail. Definitely. And I think this is why we're falling first. We're kind of repeating history, and we're not learning from history. It's unfortunate that it's usually history that's the first to go and not STEM. STEM education is always put front and center, but history is really the collective memory of us, of humankind. And I learned from my grandparents and my parents, and history is our only resource to go further back into the generations. So I'm definitely this forum is our real hope for public interpretation, public history, to get those subjects out that weren't taught in the K through 12 American education system, and hopefully also evoke interest for you all to pursue more information about this history.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. You've got a deep interest and knowledge of history.
Awesome.
Well, Alex has a deep knowledge on a lot of things.
Happy birthday, Alex.
That's
Oh,
right.
thank you.
Happy
Thank you very
birthday.
much.
Is today your birthday?
Today's my birthday. Yeah.
Ah, happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
Hey.
Años feliz.
Yeah, thank you.
21 again.
That's why I think I have a particular affinity for this story, and today is because corned beef and cabbage has kind of been my go-to birthday dinner. You know. Awesome. Well, thank you again all so
Enjoy
much
your
for
day.
such a wonderful
you too.
audience. So great to see familiar, wonderful faces, and please stay in touch. All righty.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right, thank you
thank
very much.
you.
Enjoy St. Patrick's Day. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye-bye.